Hi everyone. Today I will, as I announced last class, today I will summarize Sharon Butala and Munro, not the individual authors, but in the frame of Canadian literature, more specifically Canadian literature, as you see here. To do so, I drew upon an excerpt from this novella, Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. So this is the novella of Britain, more specifically British Empire. Why? That's because it has been written in the late 19th century, and from the early to the mid 19th century, that's the peak of the British Empire's civilization. And to compare or to show you or to compare the imagination between Canadian and Britain's English imagination, I would like to draw upon this text first. So as you see here, this is the very opening scene of the novella. I'm gonna read this aloud first, and then I will move on to more detailed analysis like this way. So please follow my reading of this passage first. So the studio was filled with the rich odor of the roses, and when the light summer wind stirred amidst the trees of the garden, there came through the open door the heavy scent of the lilac or the more delicate perfume of the pink flowering thorn. So I want you to grasp the overall atmosphere of this first paragraph. From the corner of the divan of the Parisian saddlebags on which he was lying, smoking as he was accustomed, innumerable cigarettes, Lord Henry Wotton could just catch the gleam of the honey-sweet and honey-colored blossoms of the laburnum, whose tremulous branches seemed hardly able to bear the burden of the beauty so flame-like as theirs. And now and then, the fantastic shadows of the birds in flight flitted across the long tussar silk curtains that were stretched in the front of the huge window, producing a kind of momentary Japanese effect. I think I am here. Through the medium of an art that is necessarily immobile, the sullen murmur of the bees shouldering their way through the long unmown grass or circling with monotonous insistence round the dust-gilt horns of the straggling woodbine seemed to make the stillness more oppressive. The dim roar of London was like the burden of not distant organ. So what does this passage mean? Or what is the air, what's the mood, what's the atmosphere of this first passage of this novella written in British Empire? This is the first scene that has been captured in the studio. The studio of the painter whose name is Barger Howard, and this painter is drawing a beautiful, very young man named Dorian Gray, and that studio was filled with a very rich odor of roses, but not the wild roses, but these roses are, these odor of the roses are coming from the outdoor garden, as you see here. And not just about the roses, but through the open door, the perfume, the scent of the lilac, so the odor of the roses and scent of the lilac and pink flowering of thorn. So all of these are making a very heavy air of the studio. Specifically in that studio, from the corner of the divan, specifically what we can see as the goods, as the products that are made up of this scene is that the divan of the Parisian saddlebag, which means that divan is the piece of couch. But this divan is imported one from Persia, which is now Iran. So this is the imported goods on which he was. Who is he? He was lying, smoking. Who is smoking and lying with innumerable cigarettes and other imported goods. His name is Lord Henry Wotton. As you see here, Lord, this is the sign of the high rank of aristocrat, could just catch the gleam of the honey, etc., etc., whose tremulous branches seemed hardly able to bear the burden of beauty. So the beauty is not like the light mood or natural mood, so this beauty seemed or sounded like burden. And now and then, the fantastic shadows of the birds in flight flitted across the long tussar silk curtains, another fine quality and expensive goods from imported one. That were stretched, so these silk curtains are stretched in front of the huge window, producing a kind of momentary Japanese effect. So this Japanese effect means that it's based on the Japanese art that was gaining the popularity during this period. Here, what we see is that a type of international culture from Japan, Persia, and probably another country for the cigarette. And all of these are the scene of London, which is the metropolitan city in the British Empire. So what we see as the key point is that how these people, the very special people in British Empire, have shared or have a sense of established the sense of culture. This is how they share their culture, culture which is international one. The culture is not just within the British Empire. And this is how they enjoy, this is their way of conception about the beauty and art. So this is the civilized culture that British Empire have had. Then, let's compare all of this thing with the similar period of Canadian condition. So it's around the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century in Canada. This is the two photos that I found out, two images. This is the 1890s in Toronto, the images of the Toronto in 1890s. And this is the immigrant. Do you remember the immigrants who were coming from the North America? So these are the immigrants who just began to settle in Canada in 1890s. As you see here, what we can see through these images are certain barrenness. So they didn't have a certain developed civilization yet for the Canada's case. This is the descriptions, explanation that briefly talks about the Canadian condition during those periods. Across the century that began with the Great War in August 1914, this is the point of the World War I, the complexion of Canada changed significantly. While the transition from the mostly rural to a mostly urban society. This means that the starting of the transition from the rural agricultural society to the urban society has been started, but it hasn't yet been much developed. So those development or those transition from rural agriculture to the urban city were accomplished by 1921. That is far behind the development in comparison with that of Britain's case. Then shall we then return to Butala's very opening description in her preface? It's topography. Topography is related to the nature, the landscape. Is low rolling hills and flat or sloping grassy areas cut here and there by coulees. Coulees is the imprints of the dried river. Chasms of varying sizes eroded by rain and meltwater in its shrubs or in larger ones, trees, often coniferous grove. There are virtually no trees growing naturally elsewhere and no other shelter. coolies provide the only refuge from winter blizzard and are havens for deer, rabbit. So if this is about the nature, this is the descriptions about the nature for a plant or the scenery, this sentence is more about the animal, the wild animals in the nature. So these coolies provide the only refuge from winter blizzard and are havens for deer, rabbits, and other small animals and birds. They are always fascinating places. In a sense, all of this scenery could be fascinating, but what we see here basically is that a certain bareness of nature. This is what they have. Not even the plants for the food source, but the very dryness and this wild animal. That's so why Butala starts her beginning story with this type of description. That's because, of course, Butala is interested in nature. That's how she romanticized the nature. But on the other hand, the nature, the very wilderness of the nature, that's what they have at that time. So their imagination, Butala's journey to find out her identity in South Saskatchewan, that's in a sense inevitable. Her identity journey was based on the nature. That's in a sense inevitable for the Canadian condition. What I want to point out, actually I can say this with Munro. Then can we move further to Munro's opening scene? That's the page 299 to 300. Then there was a slight hollow, which is the empty. A couple of rickety houses. Do you know the meaning of the rickety? That's the condition, actually worst condition of the house that would soon to be collapsing. Just like these two cases. This is the case of the rickety house for clay version. This is the wooden version of the rickety house. And these rickety houses are the daily scenery that Munro views all the time. And not just about the rickety condition, but these rickety houses were undergoing the flood every spring. But still people are in here, different people from different places. They all the time came and lived in any way. So their life here in any way. That's another comparison or a different point in comparison with the special type of living in the passage that I have shown you in the Oscar Wilde's opening scene. And then another bridge over the mill race. So this is the related image that I found out. This is a mill race over the bridge, which was narrow, but deep enough to drown you. This type of image can be romanticized in a beautiful way, but the ways in which Munro describes this one is that not pleasant. It's not beautiful at all, but it could be danger. It could be very risky for our life. And after that, the road, there's a divided road for Munro. One part of it going south up a hill and over the river again to become a genuine highway. That's one part of the road. Another part is the other jogging around the old fairgrounds to turn west. That westward road was Munro's one. And through this westward road, Munro's imagination was starting. So I think that there's a certain common between Butala and Munro. If Munro's case is there's a mixture between nature and human life, Butala's one is more toward about the description about nature. But still, what I see as a common between these two authors is the bare sense of nature, bare sense of wildness, or certain scarcity, lack of resources. So if that makes sense, why these two authors have studied their writing at the initial scene is because that's how they reflect on their national condition, which was the Canada in the past. So to sum up, in comparison with British Empire's culture in the late 19th century, Canadian in the same period didn't have that type of established sense of culture, very developed sense of culture, civilized one. At the period of the Founding Fathers Confederation, do you remember this process of confederation? That how Canada became to be, how the fragmented Canadian territory became to be the dominion of the Canada? After that point, in 1867, there was a peak. So at the same period, there's a peak of imperial culture in Britain. So that way, the experience between Canada and then the experience of British Empire, and thereby experiences along with the imagination based on the different experiences cannot help but be different from those two countries. And here I'm drawing upon the British Empire's case for the comparison, to show you how the Canadian imagination based on their own landscape, their own nation, their national culture in the past. So what Butala and Munro are showing through their, especially the opening scene, and through their works, their writing works, is a different sense of imagination, which was started from bare wilderness and lack of sources, and that way certain scarcity, a lack of luxuriousness. So this is how I sum up Butala and Munro as the Canadian authors in terms of the Canadian imagination. For the next class, please read, perhaps at this point you might have seen the uploaded PDF file for James Joyce's The Dead. Please read the half of the short story from 2172 to 2182. And while reading, I want you to think about what type of atmosphere. So there's a very dominant mood, very dominant sense of atmosphere is hovering over the short story. So I want you to think about while you read the short story. I will stop here and thank you for listening to today's class again.